and decide art, so I'm really excited for this. Paleontology student, PhD candidate, UW. And then this is the little blurb that was put on all of the things. So it's also a fitting word because it's like the whole presentation when our ancestors first start to hear. So this is a literal sense of hearing of like when did this all develop, and I'm excited to see her presentation. So I will stop sharing.
All right, here, let me get my PowerPoint up then. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to give this talk today. I've been meaning to go to these, the Kamustahans, but I have been a little all over the place lately and haven't really gotten myself to do stuff like that lately. But yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit. I clearly forgot the title that I submitted, but basically I'm going to talk about how our sense of hearing evolved in our very deep ancestors before mammals. Let's see. So first, I just wanted to give like a little introduction to like myself and kind of how I got into science. It all started like when I was really little. As you can imagine, being a paleontologist, my passions kind of had a very early start in loving dinosaurs. I couldn't find a good picture of me liking dinosaurs, so here's me enjoying my favorite dinosaur at the time very early on. But I really loved animals and dinosaurs, and I really loved biology and science. And so growing up, my mom really tried to like foster that in me. Even though she didn't really like know that much about science, she was really supportive and would buy me books and stuff all the time. And I knew that I wanted to end up being a scientist. But I also had a lot of other things that I was passionate about growing up. For example, I was really into art. So this is a stuffed animal giraffe that I made when I was 8 years old for my mom. She was also really supportive in my art hobbies. Like I made this out of scraps that she gave me while she was sewing something. I think it was giraffe pajamas or something. And I was like, oh, I'll make a giraffe. But growing up, it was always like I had these two things that I really loved. And you kind of hear from society and just people around you like, oh, well, art isn't like as practical of a skill. So you should become a scientist. And that's like, just went down that path because I was like, oh yeah, of course. And so fast forward to today, I am a PhD student in paleontology. I get to go out and look for fossils, which is really fun. And I'm really passionate about studying how living things evolved and just like the story of where the different parts of animal bodies came from and like how diversity happened. I just think that that's all really interesting and fascinating. But I never really let go of my artistic side. I kind of let it grow along with my scientific side. You can see this is a extinct bird / dinosaur that I made a stuffed animal of. And so I've gotten a little bit better at both of my skills now. This is kind of where it started, where it's at now. But one thing that I've really realized, especially lately, is that even though my whole life I was told like, oh yeah, like follow your science and then art will just be like a hobby on the side. It's really more like I've realized and come to appreciate how much my artistic side helps boost my scientific side, in addition to my science, like boosting my artistic side. Like I use my art skills in my science, at least the type of science that I do, constantly. And I'm really happy for the encouragement that I got early on in like fostering creativity and building artistic skills. And I think it's really important to kind of remind ourselves of that, especially as we're like as we teach future generations, like it's important to give them some kind of like art education and support their interests in art. So I'm going to kind of pepper that theme kind of throughout my talk today. So to get into like the more content stuff. Like I said, now what I'm doing for my PhD is studying hearing. So this is a chart showing the frequency ranges of a bunch of different animals that have been studied. I don't know how exactly they get this information, but yeah, they just play like different sounds for a bird and see like when it tilts its head or something. I don't know. But here's a chart to give you an idea. This is like high frequencies and low frequencies to give you an idea of kind of the range we're talking about here. This black line, this black line is Darth Vader's voice. I think we all know how that's like that very low Darth Vader voice. And this top line is Morissette Amon's high note in this song. So there you go. You get like a good idea of the range of what these sounds are. But one thing that you'll notice is if you look at all these different animals, You have, these are like the non-mammals, and then these in like the more brown and orange colors are the mammals. And you can see that mammals have a really good like high frequency hearing range. And so why is that? Why are like all these other animals like barely able to appreciate like really high singer music? And it really comes down to the construction of the ear in each animal. So this is what it looks like in a mammal. This is what it looks like in us. And just to kind of remind people of how the ears work, there is, so if this is like the outside of the ear over here, there will be sound waves that go into your ear and they hit into this membrane here called the eardrum, and it vibrates that membrane. Those vibrations get passed on to these little tiny bones that are connecting it, and they like hinge with each other, and they will vibrate. And so they're like vibrating little hinges, and then they send those vibrations over here and kind of push up against the wall of this fluid-filled inner ear, and that sends vibrations through the fluid that gets sensed by the cells inside. So that's how a mammal ear works. If you look at like what all these other animals have in their ear, it's pretty much the same setup, but one major difference is that the middle ear, instead of being made up of these 3 bones that are hinging with each other, it's 1 bone and then like a cartilage connection to the eardrum. And the importance there is that if there are 3 solid bones that are hinging, they can like propagate high frequency sounds easier than if it's 1 bone and it's got like a squishy attachment to the eardrum. That flexibility in the cartilage there means that it damps high frequency sounds. And so that's why these other animals aren't able to hear as high frequency sounds as mammals are. So this is something we've known about for a while, but like why do they have this different ear construction? Like everything else is the same. Why are there like so many different bones in the mammal ear versus in all these other animals? Mammals are the only ones that look like this. They're the total outliers. So in order to answer that question, you have to kind of go into the fossil record. So specifically, you want to look at the fossil record of what are called synapsids. So synapsids is a group that includes mammals and all of our extinct relatives. So I'm a synapsid, you're a synapsid. No offense, but your mom's a synapsid. This is like this is our family tree basically. So I'm just gonna kind of march you guys through kind of what the evolution of our ear bones kind of looked like. And in order to do that, we have to start actually at the back of the jaw in these very early animals. This is kind of what a reptile jaw looks like also. This is kind of just a starting point for a lot of these like land animals. But they have all of these different bones at the back of the jaw, which is different from what we have. We only have 1 bone in our jaw, and it's just like that 1 bone. There are a whole bunch of different bones in our ancestors' jaws. If you fast forward a little bit, what happens to those bones is they start getting a little bit more delicate. And one weird thing that happens is that this dark blue bone called the angular, it gets this weird like plate on it that has all these ridges. And one of the things I'm trying to study is like what the ridges were for basically, but it has this plate of bone on the side of it. So we'll talk about that in a sec. But another thing that happens then is like that plate kind of turns into like a little curve or like a C shape, and then everything gets smaller. And it's also becoming more loosely connected to the rest of the jaw. And what ends up happening once you get to mammals is that those loosely connected tiny bones at the back, they actually pop off from the rest of the jaw and they go into the ear. And they are those 3 like ear bones that I showed that are like hinging with each other. And then also that blue bone that I showed earlier is now what's holding like the eardrum in place. And so your ear bones are actually developed from what used to be like your ancestors' jaw bones. And you can kind of feel this a little bit actually when you like go to the dentist and like they give you a shot in the back of your mouth. You can like feel it a little bit in your ear because like it's like right there. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, so we have like really good fossil records showing this. I've seen a lot of the fossils that of all these different little critters. But so we know that like this is how it happened. We have a very good picture of like how the changes happened. But the question that I'm trying to answer is like, why? Why would you ever like take bones from the back of your jaw and turn them into your ear? Like that doesn't make any sense. Everybody else, all the other animals, they just like took this bone here and it was like already kind of stuck onto the ear. And they were like, okay, that'll just be the 1 ear bone. Like a very simple solution. We went like way extra with it. And so I'm trying to figure out like why we did that. And so in order to figure that out, there are like 2 hypotheses basically for why that would have happened. One is that it's possible that these early animals that had like all those bones in the back of their jaw might have already been kind of using those bones for hearing. Like maybe they were resting their jaw on the ground to feel vibrations, or maybe they could hear some sound anyway, like in the air. And so maybe like it's just like a natural progression of selection for having like lighter, better ear bones for like vibrating at high frequencies. The other option though is that you have to consider that as mammals are evolving, like a lot of different changes are happening, as you could imagine. One of those changes that's happening is that we're getting stronger bite force over time. And so there was selection for having just one bone in the lower jaw, because having one bone instead of like a bunch of little bones is like, it's more sturdy. So it can handle those bite forces stronger. And so maybe like just getting that one bone there was kind of what it was going for. And the smaller bones at the back of the jaw kind of just shrank down and weren't really being used for anything else. So like, why not turn it into an ear, right? So those are kind of the ideas for how this might have happened. It's hard to tell the difference between these two hypotheses unless we know like how did the ear work in these early animals? Like were they actually able to use these bones for hearing? And it gets really complicated trying to figure out how an extinct animal worked, like how its body just worked, because we only have the bones. You have to like kind of play detective a little bit and figure out like indirect ways to look at the bones and get them to tell you something about the animal's biology. Here's one hypothesis that for how the ear of an early like mammal ancestor might have worked if it was being used as an ear while it was attached to the jaw. And that is to have this plate of bone that I was talking about earlier, this really thin plate of bone, actually act like an eardrum, which sounds really weird, but it kind of makes sense because this bone, as I kind of showed you, is actually the same bone that holds the eardrum in place in modern animals or modern mammals. And so you could imagine that like over time, maybe there was this kind of intermediate where like it starts out acting as an eardrum, but then like it starts kind of not being as bony and turning more into a membrane. And then over time, it just becomes like a bone that's holding a membrane in place. It's like a very elegant way to put all this together. It also would explain like why these bones specifically got incorporated into the ear, because right, like these are all those three other bones that are hinging with each other, and it's already like touching this this bone that could have been an eardrum. And so it makes a lot of sense. But in science, you know, we want to try to do more than just like say things that make sense. We have to like try to test it. And so I'm trying to go through and actually test this hypothesis that's been around for like a really long time. So like I said, it's hard to tell how an extinct animal worked. And so there are kind of two ways that you want to do that. So one of the ways is that you can use like the basic rules of physics and based on like first principles, just look at how the bone is constructed and try to think of like physically, like, and you can do this through like computer modeling and stuff too, but think about like, okay, like how physically would this have worked compared to like another animal? So say you wanted to know like how fast a T-Rex could run. You could look at like how long the legs are, like what are the levers of the leg movement and how heavy the animal is. And you could try to like put together a model that way. So one of the ways that I'm trying to solve this problem is by quantifying the variation in the shape of the surface of the reflected lamina, because like I said, it has a bunch of different like ridges and stuff. And so I'm trying to see if there are any like acoustic consequences to like how those shapes come about. And just also if there's any patterns in how that shape evolved. Another way that you can study function in an extinct animal, and you want to have like a couple lines of evidence for this kind of stuff, right? Because it's kind of squishy trying to like do all of this indirect work and figure out like how an extinct animal could hear. So another line of evidence that I'm trying to use is to look at a modern animal that's similar and see like how does it work in this animal, and are there indicators of like what the function is in the modern animal that you can apply to an extinct one. So that's what I'm doing in this case. I'm looking at a modern animal that actually uses a bone like an eardrum, like in this hypothesized example. And I'm seeing if there are indicators in its morphology that could be applied to the fossil record and tell us like whether or not there's evidence that the bones were used for hearing in these other animals. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of like what I've been doing for both of these projects. So for the first project, which is quantifying variation, This is just to kind of give you a sense of like, these are a bunch of different skulls of those little dudes that I showed you earlier. These are all different synapsids. And you can see there's like variation in how many ridges they have, like the shape of the reflected lamina. It's like kind of all over the place. And this is something that people have kind of avoided for a while in science, because first of all, this thing is so thin that it like breaks all the time and is super annoying. Like I went to all these museums and had to collect data on them. And it was like every specimen that I pulled out in the museum drawers was broken, and it made me want to die. But I was able to find enough to do like something with it at least. But yeah, so it's super thin, first of all, so nobody wants to work with it. And like, it's really hard to tell like what the patterns are on these ridges, because there's so much variation between animals that like people just haven't wanted to deal with it. So that also means though that I can have a PhD and have a project to do. So I went through and like surface scanned a bunch of these fossils and put together these like surface meshes. And you can do all these different things that I'm working on right now. This one's showing a measure of like how much curvature is on the surface. And so you can do that and kind of like quantify how it's changing over time. This is just like a crappy figure that I put together with like really preliminary data. But basically one thing that I'm seeing so far is there seems to be like a trend of like, you like start out getting the ridges, but then in some of these groups you kind of trend more towards like simplicity in the structure. Oh, why is it doing that? Okay, you trend towards more simplicity. And so one thing that I'm trying to figure out is like why that might happen. And one thing that I'm kind of thankful for, and this kind of goes back to my thing about like making sure people have experience with art, is that in trying to think of all this like acoustic stuff, I was a band kid in high school. And so like we learned a lot about how like a structure resonates and like interacts with sound waves. And so I'm able to like kind of, I at least like have a little bit of background in that. And so it's able to give me like a framework to work with when I'm thinking about these things. Yeah, so that's kind of where that project's at right now. The other line that I was going on, which is making modern comparisons, what I ended up looking at is chameleons actually have a bone that they use for an eardrum. They don't have like a proper like membrane eardrum, but they do have, or at least some species have this little connection. This is like the stapes, this is going into like the brain, that's where the inner ear is. They have this little connection that goes up to this bone. This is like on the roof of the mouth if you're like looking up at the skull. This really like paper thin bone called the pterygoid. They have a connection that goes over to it, and they actually use vibrations that receives from the side of the head, and like they're able to like the vibrations will get passed to the inner ear, and they can actually interpret that as sound, which is super cool that like you can make an ear out of anything basically. But since it's so similar to what has possibly been used for our mammal ancestors with like their jaw bones being used as an ear, I wanted to look more closely at this. Oh, here, let me highlight that there. I wanted to look more closely at the system and see like if there were any indications in this bone that would tell us like, okay, you can like apply that and look for that feature in the fossil record and you'll know that it was used for hearing. So one thing that I had to do, first of all, is that surprisingly enough, we don't know that much about chameleon hearing. In fact, we don't even know like, or at least we didn't, now we do. We didn't know like which chameleons actually had this connection and could hear sound at all. And so I had to go through and do dissections of different chameleon specimens in museums and see like which ones had this connection and probably use it for hearing. If you don't want to see dissection pictures, don't look at the next couple slides. They just look like, I think they look like raw chicken, but maybe some people don't like it. I don't know. I get kind of hungry when I do dissections and that like really disturbs me. Anyway, this is what it kind of looks like. So over here is like where the inner ear would be. Oh, hold on, there we go. Over here would be like where the inner ear would be. This is that pterygoid bone, would be under all this delicious meaty muscle. And then this is like the ear bone with its connection. And so I was able to, this is another case where like being an artist really helped with this, because like chameleons are not, they're not very big. And like you have to really be able to finesse your way in there to find all these little tiny ear bones. And I was able to do it because like if I can sew a freaking bird monster thing, like I can definitely cut open a chameleon face. Like it's no problem apparently. But yeah, I used my motor skills to look into these guys. but yeah, I was able to go through like all these different chameleon species and identify which ones have this connection. So now a paper that I'm supposed to work on any day now is going to be showing which species of chameleons can actually hear sound and which ones can't. So that's really exciting. It turns out that this like ear arrangement actually evolved like 5 different times separately in chameleons. So they all like had the same idea basically. And I think that's really cool. But anyway, so yeah, once I got an idea of like which chameleons can hear at all, I was able to go through and look for some features in those ears that might tell us like that are like indicative of being an ear. So one thing that I am looking at is how the bone grows relative to the body size. And so this is based on like usually a sensory structure, like an eyeball is a good example of this. It grows kind of slowly compared to the overall body size. So this is why like puppies are super cute, for example, because like they have these huge eyes when they're born, and then, you know, they grow up into like normal dogs over time, and their eyes are not, they don't like keep growing that much compared to body size. And it's because like they've gotten to like the size that they need to be to do their seeing function. And so they don't need to like keep growing all that much. So we had the idea to look for that feature, like see if there's like a specific growth curve that is indicative of an ear. And so we like, or I did all this. I looked at like all these different ear bones on these chameleons and measured their size compared to like the skull size. And this is kind of what I found. This is the group of chameleons that don't have the ear that does that. They still have the same bone, but it's not used as an ear. So it's a really good like control. And you can see their growth curves are kind of all over the place. Whereas these are the species that use it for hearing, and they all have like the same like slope at which their ear bones grow compared to their body size. And I'm not totally sure what that means yet, but it is really interesting that it's like such a clear signal. And so this is something that I'm going to look for in our mammal ancestor fossils and try to see like, did their ear bones also kind of follow this pattern? Or are there like changes in the pattern over time that might tell us like whether or not it was being used for hearing? So yeah, that's basically what I've been up to. Some things that I want to do in the future are like kind of expanding on basically just like finishing up my analyses that I need to do for my like 3D surface stuff, and also just like describe like the variation that we see in those bones, because like I said, everybody kind of avoids it. And so like just getting like standard nomenclature for like all the different grooves and stuff would be super cool. The other thing I want to do is, like I said, apply that growth curve stuff to early synapsids and see if their ears have any evidence for like constrained growth. And then another thing I wanted to keep doing, obviously, is like continuing with making sure that I incorporate my art into as much as what I do as possible, especially in like outreach stuff. I want to try to, I'm trying to like come up with like videos and stuff I can do that kind of combine art and science. And so whenever I actually get around to doing that, that'll be like my next project too. But yeah, thank you guys for inviting me to this, and I'm excited to hear people's questions.
Thank you. Yeah,
there's so much in the chat.
There was a lot happening in the chat. I can filter to those questions, but if anyone has a pressing question right now for like post presentation, feel free to unmute and ask, and I'll filter and ask the ones that were asked throughout the presentation.
I have a question that's pressing.
Okay.
What is your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, my favorite dinosaur? I have a favorite meat eater and a favorite plant eater. Can I say both?
Yeah.
Okay, my favorite plant eater is Lambeosaurus, because I like all the weird, it has like a very specific crest. I like the ones with like the weird stuff on their heads. I like Lambeosaurus, and I like Allosaurus, which also has like weird stuff on its head.
I have a question, which is, does having the ear bones like part of your mouth mean that if you open your mouth wide, that you can hear better?
I don't think the way that mammals have it, it would work that way, because it's like the sounds are like coming from the side of the jaw, but there are actually some animals that hear like that. There are some frogs that are like so tiny that their eardrums wouldn't be big enough to like capture like low frequency sound vibrations. And so they actually like will open up their mouth and use it as a resonating chamber to like bring the vibrations to their ear.
Yummy music.
My question was, aside from like the ridge that you see as a pattern, was there a pattern in like the thickness of the bones that you examined? And like, will you be doing, like, is it possible to like from those measurements, like the ridges and thickness and the shape and size, would it be possible to determine like what like the vibration or like the range of sounds that an animal can hear?
Yeah, so I actually did take thickness measurements because, like I said, the bone's usually broken. So you can actually, like, if you can get calipers on the side of it, you can see like the thickness pretty well. And so what I found is that people always describe it as like the more ancestral ones had like a super thick bone, whereas the later ones had thinner ones. But like they are all pretty thin. Like they're like a couple millimeters at most. And some of them are like thinner than paper. And so I have measurements for that. It seems like they're all like really thin, but yeah, getting to your thing about like being able to figure out the frequencies that they'd be able to hear. That's what I want to do as a postdoc. I have like, you can do like CT scans of these guys and get like a nice 3D model of like the backside of these things as well. And I want to go through and like, you can do, there's like physics modeling software that you can do to like test for like how things vibrate. And I want to just do that to a bunch of these guys and just see like what the patterns are. It gets a little like iffy because like obviously the bone wouldn't just be by itself on the animal. There would be like all this muscle and stuff around it that would be damping it, and you don't really know what that would have looked like, but you can at least get kind of an idea.
Yeah, thanks.
I have another question.
Okay.
Out of all the museums you went to do your research, which one was the favorite of all of them you went to?
Oh man, okay. I guess like the most fun that I had was I went, a lot of these animals come from South Africa, like they just happen to have fossils there. So I went to South Africa for like 2 months to like go to different museums there. And one of the museums there, like it was just really like, they had a lot of fossils there, so that was really nice. But also the people there were just like super chill. And like, even though I was like as far away from home as I could possibly be, like being from Seattle, I just felt like super at home with like all the students that were there.
There's a question in the chat. Willette, how has 3D printing changed the landscape for testing / researching?
Oh yeah, 3D printing is like super useful for research now because it's like a lot of the times with fossils, like unless you're like super careful, it's hard to get them out of the rock. But if you can CT scan them and there's like good enough contrast between the bone and the rock, you can just like print out what the fossil would look like, and then you can just like look at it. And if you're trying to figure out stuff about the morphology, it's a good like starting point to like get an idea for what things look like. And also like I work with some people who study like later mammal ancestors where they get like really tiny during the dinosaur age, and their teeth are like super small. Like you are not going to be able to get anything from just like looking at that except under a microscope. But if you 3D print it to be really big, then you can just hold it in your hand and look at it and like really think about it better.
Very cool.
Oh,
You can go, Jess.
okay. I have a question about if you can model the frequency of vocalizations of like the predators, because if these animals happen to survive because they can hear their predators coming or like vocalizing, then that's maybe that's how they got selected for, because they could survive that and dodge those predators. So I guess my question is there a way to reasonably kind of predict or model what vocalizations could be like if you just are working with bones, or are you limited with that?
Yeah, it's hard for vocalization specifically because a lot of that comes from like the throat, and that's all soft tissue. Like you're almost never going to find that in a fossil. One thing that's kind of neat with these guys is that there's like one paper written about it in like the 50s that nobody's talked about because like it's pretty much untestable. But there's the idea that like since like this structure could like receive sound and like vibrate, you can also do like the opposite, where if you like vibrate it from the inside, it'll produce the sound at that frequency. And so he had this idea that like maybe this was used as like both vocalization and for like receiving the frequencies of those vocalizations, which I think is kind of cool because like it does kind of make sense because like this is all coming from a time period where like they literally spent like millions and millions of years. Everything on Earth on the land like could not hear, except I guess like insects could hear, but like they could hear like only like low frequency sounds. And that only really changed once like buzzing insects started evolving and they had prey that they could try to go after, that they could hear like those high frequency sounds of them like buzzing and flying. And so it's like they clearly didn't really care if they could hear each other for a very long time because none of them like really evolved to be able to hear that well. But yeah, it's hard to like tell what kind of a life they were living and what they would have needed to hear in the past.
Cool. All interesting though still, thanks.
I don't know if anyone has any more questions. Gabe? Welcome. Did you have a question? I think so. Another question in the chat. For mammals, what developed faster, ears, nose, or eyes?
Oh, I guess like, I think when you're an embryo, your ears actually develop like really quickly. And I think the other stuff maybe comes a little bit later, but they all like evolve, or sorry, they all develop like pretty fast. I guess it kind of depends on how much parental care you're getting to, right? Like if you're something that needs to be able to hear right away, like whales, they grow their ears very quickly when they're babies because that's how they communicate with their mom. And so if a baby whale can't hear, like they're just gonna die because like they don't know where their mom is. But if it's something else, yeah, it like kind of depends on the animal, I think, and like what their babies are doing and how independent they are, and what kind of lifestyle they have.
So I say, I'm sorry I'm late. Hi, Savannah.
Hi.
You're good. Do you have any questions, random things?
Savannah, what's your favorite fossil Pokemon?
My favorite fossil Pokemon? Oh man. I'm pretty sure it's Aerodactyl, but let me just make sure. Oh no, it's Archeops.
Okay, good answer.
He's so like flamboyant and terrifying looking.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, prime combo.
I think I actually have, yeah, I have a plushie of Archon that I made.
Oh yes.
He's just a perfect little baby.
We I don't know if I showed you, Savannah, but for one of our pop-up museums, we had a piece of amber that we brought, and we created, you know, the specimen of Archaeopteryx from the Solfenhohen, or the
Yeah.
not Solfenhohen, that one. We recreated that image, but with Archaeops in it.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was
I
really
think
cool.
I saw something like that on Twitter or something.
I think that's probably, I shared it there.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Ooh, Armaldo is cool too.
Yeah, Armaldo, when I had like the little flick of my eyes, like trying to think if there were any contenders, Armaldo was what was going through my head.
My two favorite are Amora and oh shoot, what's the Pachycephalosaur one?
Oh, Cranidos or Rampardos, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Just because I love, those are two of my favorite dinosaurs.
Yeah, those are good ones.
Anyway, I didn't mean to derail that conversation. Sorry.
You did it. You're
I have
good.
I have another question. Sorry, I have a lot of questions
Go
on
ahead, Dave.
dinosaurs. So I know it's kind of like a meme. Where, oh, how do we know dinosaurs didn't have beards? Because there's no fossils of dinosaur beards, right? I also see skeletons of like penguins and like bison, and they look like totally different from like how they actually look in real life. So how can we like accurately like predict what like dinosaurs like actually look like? Like I seen like, you know, Jurassic Park, you know, there's like all scaly and stuff, and now we know there's like feathers or something. But how do we like, you know, figure that stuff out? Like what they looks like?
Yeah, so that actually kind of falls under the same category of what I'm doing, where it's like you're trying to reconstruct something that's gone now and you only have the bones. And so that would kind of fall under the, like, you have to look at what their relatives today kind of look like. And if there's any evidence that the fossils give you, then that's helpful, but you kind of have to piece it together from what you have today. So like for a dinosaur, for example, you have like on one side of their family tree is crocodiles, those are like relatives. And then like on the closer side of their family tree to them would be birds. And so if there's a feature that like both crocodiles and birds have, which is not very many things because they're very different animals. But if there are features that both of them have, they probably have them too in dinosaurs. It's like less likely that they just like lost it. But yeah, a lot of that stuff is kind of speculation. Sometimes you can kind of tell where like muscles would have attached onto bones. There'll be like rougher or smoother spots where that's happening. But for the most part, you have to like kind of make comparisons with modern animals, and a lot of it is, I think it's kind of fun because a lot of it is just kind of up to the imagination. Because like, yeah, we would never know if T-Rex had like a chicken doodle on its head. Like, there's no way we would ever know that. I think I can be completely confident and say that we would never know that, unless we got like a fossil of one like smashed and there's a chicken doodle on the top of it. But yeah, so it's kind of like up to the imagination a little bit.
I have another question. This one's for Gabe, actually. So, when does the Alf Museum open back up?
Oh, we're closed until further notice. That's the only answer I'm allowed to give, unfortunately. Sorry. Savannah, is the Burke opening up again soon?
They are open at like partial capacity. I'm like kind of not stoked about it because I have to go in now for like an RA ship, but there aren't that many people. It's just like I have to wait for old ladies to get down the stairs.
Wait, how's
so
the
how's the
remodel?
Oh, it's really nice. Like the building's so pretty. But it happened like right before COVID, so we like got almost nothing out of it. I actually got to I forgot to put this in my presentation, but one of my other like science and art things that I've done is that I do a lot of 3D printing for like skeletons, and I've printed a lot of the stuff in that museum.
Oh, nice.
So it's like really cool. I'm like super proud of it.
Wait, which ones did you print, Savannah?
I printed the Shivasaurid, and I like CT scanned all those bones and probably even found some of those bones. So I was like there for the whole process, which is really satisfying.
I didn't know
and then
that.
I printed the Revoltosaurus, and there's a turtle. I think that's all I did.
That's so cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now I can go, next time I go, I'm like, I know who made these.
Yeah, I definitely have like a selfie in front of the skeleton that I printed.
I have a question. I think it just goes widely in the paleontology field, like anyone could answer. But like you've mentioned about like family tree of dinosaurs and species and everything. I was just wondering, like coming from, you know, a molecular biology and genetics perspective, if you know, like sequencing or DNAs, I don't know if they're DNA samples or like, I know samples would be limited to with bones and everything, but is that method widely used in the field as well to you know, to delineate species or even like draw relations with each other or associations?
Yeah, most of what we do for that is pretty old school because most of the time we don't have sequences for stuff. So we're just like looking at the morphology and coming up with characteristics to plug into our trees as characters. Which is like, there are all kinds of problems with that, but it's like the best we can do for right now. One thing that people are kind of starting to get into, and this is like, I think super controversial, so I don't even know if this would like is real, but some people are at least saying that they're getting like proteins and stuff that they're able to isolate from like dinosaur bones. And so you can get like kind of an amino acid sequence from that at least and do like phylogeny with that. But like one, that's really hard to do. Two, like from what I've heard, there's a lot of issues with like cross-contamination with doing that. I don't have a third thing, but it would have been nice to round off the list. But yeah, that's like, it's like maybe something that could happen eventually. But yeah, for now we're like kind of just stuck with doing the like crappy morphology-based phylogenies.
Savannah, do you know if fossil calibrations is still used in when you combine it with genetic studies? I don't, it's been a while since I've looked at that kind of research.
Yeah, they do still do that, although that's like kind of iffy too, because it's like, I don't know, I always have trouble like visualizing, like if you say like this is the fossil that represents the ancestor, like if you then compare that to like genetic sequence, like what does that actually mean for it being like the genetic ancestor? And then there's also like uncertainty with like where the fossil actually came from in the time scale. But like, you know, if it's like a really big time period you're talking about, then you at least get kind of an idea for calibration.
Thank you.
I have a question, which is how do you fight off the urges of changing things when you're 3D modeling, of being like, well, this might be like that on both for like scientific reasons, like maybe this is chipped or something, and for personal reasons, like it'd be pretty funny this extruded just a bit more.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I have to think about that a lot. That's something that I also forgot to kind of mention, but like those scans, they do not look that nice when you take them originally. Like you have to go through and smooth them, and I have to make a lot of hard decisions of like, okay, is this actually like the surface? Or is it just broken? Can I like smooth it? How much can I smooth it? And then like trying to fill in like pieces that are missing. I do fill in things if it's like really obvious where stuff is, but if I can't tell and I would have to like just totally make something up, I will just like put that in as missing data instead of like trying to do that. But if I'm printing something for an exhibit and it has to look pretty, then like, I'll take a little bit more like leeway there, because then it gets into more like art than like I need to do this perfectly or I will get the wrong results or something.
Okay, so we are nearing the end with 1 minute, and I'm going to take a photo for publicity, so for our newsletter and for Instagram. So if you want to be in the photo, turn your camera on. If you don't, that's cool too. But I'll count down. So, Carl. So yeah, 3, 2, 1. Got it. I think Fred has an announcement.
Yes, just want to say thank you, Savannah, again, for taking the time to make the presentation, for talking to us. I came late, my apologies, with a different meeting beforehand, but I'm sure, as Gabe said, you rocked it. So yeah, if you are comfortable to share your slides to AFSA, so we